Welcome back to Upper 90, where today we're going to take a little detour from MLS because Mauricio Pochettino is on his way to be the next head coach of the U.S. men's national team. And while it hasn't been officially announced yet, everybody and their mothers has reported the deal to be completed. And the reason for that being that Mauricio Pochettino is technically still under contract at Chelsea and has to have his contract termination resolved with that club. That should not be a problem, though, and will be resolved soon enough, and then he will be able to sign this U.S. men's national team contract. He is expected to take over before the upcoming friendlies, that first one being against Canada, against, of course, Jesse Marsch. And before we get into why, I just want to say that I think that puts into perspective just how great of a hire this is for the U.S. men's national team, because many people, including myself, would have been satisfied or even happy with the appointment of Jesse Marsch, but instead we are getting Mauricio Pochettino, who is clearly at a much higher level. Now, why is he at a much higher level? Well, there are a few reasons, and three main ones that I want to focus on. The first one is that Mauricio Pochettino always does more with less. And that is very crucial when it comes to this U.S. men's national team, as we will get into. Number two, he is a fantastic player developer, especially when it comes to young talent. He is very good at turning talent into world-class ability. And number three is the accountability within the team that applies both to the players and to Pochettino, which of course we will get into. But starting with that first point, and the fact that Mauricio Pochettino always does more with less. And we can look quickly at his CV to see why that's true. For his playing career, for those of you who don't know, Mauricio Pochettino played for Espanyol, the other club in Barcelona, and he was a very good player, so much so that when he became a manager, he was given that Espanyol job with very little to no experience as a first-team manager. Of course, he took over that Espanyol job in a relegation battle and then helped them finish consistently mid-table. Of course, that infamous first draw against Pep Guardiola's Barcelona as well. Eventually, he did leave due to a lack of backing and poor results, which I think that we can see throughout his career became a trend, which is just another thing I respect him for. He's only going to stay in a job if he believes it is the right place for him. And Espanyol no longer was. He moved on to Southampton, where within a season, he took that team from 14th in the Premier League table to 8th in the Premier League table. That was a huge overperformance for Southampton, as always, doing more with less that he is given. That's why he quickly moved on to Tottenham Hotspur, a club that would give him more, spend a little bit more. But before he moved on there, he made a crucial connection when it comes to joining the U.S. men's national team, and that is Matt Crocker, who at the time was the technical director at Southampton, is now the technical director with the U.S. men's national team, with the U.S. Soccer Federation more accurately, and hired Mauricio Pochettino. So the connection that they built years ago at Southampton has now borne fruit in Mauricio Pochettino taking the men's national team job. And I think that all this credit needs to be given to Matt Crocker, because not only on the men's side, but on the women's side, he has hired a fantastic manager, of course, in Emma Hayes. And so no matter really what you think about either one of the two, when you combine them, we have the best managerial tandem in the entire world. And I don't think that that's really up for question. But I do want to focus now on his time at Tottenham Hotspur, because I think that this is the best U.S. men's national team comparison for Mauricio Pochettino in his managerial jobs in Europe. Obviously, it was his best job. I think that we can all agree on that. He took over the team when they weren't in European football. Within a year, he got them in European football, and then after that, he finished 4 consecutive years in Champions League spots in the top 4 in the Premier League. Of course, in 2019, making that Champions League final. And that is crucial to me. I want to point out, because a lot of people look at that Champions League final and say, oh, it was a one-hit wonder for Mauricio Pochettino, that he had one very good season. That's just a complete myth. It doesn't make any sense to me. He finished in the top 4 years in a row. One of those, he finished second place in the Premier League. I think when you look at it, he had really 5 years of success. And going on to that second point, the player development is really key here at Tottenham Hotspur because he turned Harry Kane and Heung-min Son into the players that you know them as today. When he got them, they were talented young players. They are now world-class attackers, and that is a direct result of Mauricio Pochettino's coaching. I don't see why he can't do the same thing with Christian Pulisic and Gio Reyna and potentially even Fuller and Balogun. These are players that have immense talent but haven't necessarily pushed on to that world-class attacker level. Christian's starting to do that at AC Milan, but this is something that Mauricio Pochettino is fantastic at. And if I remember correctly, I think in the past he said he likes a player like Christian Pulisic. So why not? Why can't he turn them into some of the better players in the world? I also think that he shouldn't have even been sacked from Tottenham Hotspur. He had a bad start to the 1920 season, but was sacked within 12 games after 5 successful seasons. That's crazy to me. Personally, though, watching this team, Pochettino's Spurs was one of my favorite teams to watch over the past decade in European football, and that is coming from a Manchester City supporter. I was rooting against his teams, but I still loved watching them. Of course, you had Kane and Son in transition, that smothering counter press. They could play through you if they needed to. They were defensively solid despite a lack of individual defensive talent. I think that can translate well to the U.S. men's national team, another similar situation. And crucially, they could break down a low block. But you just look at that team overall. They had a couple pieces of world-class talent, which again, Mauricio Pochettino created in Kane and Son. But for the most part, it was a relatively average team that he overperformed with, took them to finals. I think that you look at U.S. men's national team and you see something rather similar. There are a few players, as I mentioned, Pulisic, Reyna, who can be at that top level, who have that top end talent. But if you look at the entire squad, it's not the top level that you're going to see in other national teams around the world. And that, to me, is Mauricio Pochettino's sweet spot, where he succeeds the most. And that is why I think it will be a success with the U.S. men's national team. But of course, he also has some elite experience with Paris Saint-Germain and Chelsea. And I think that they both are looked upon disfavorably by many for some reason, when I think that they were rather successful in a lot of ways. He won some trophies at PSG, which is an important thing for a manager to have that experience. Obviously, he didn't win the Champions League, but he did win Ligue 1. That is performing to expectation, in my opinion. Did he overperform expectation to win the Champions League? No, but no manager ever has at PSG, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do. He did, however, win the Ligue 1, and more importantly, he gets the experience of working with players who not only have the talent, but the ego of Kylian Mbappe and Neymar. Of course, he worked with Lionel Messi, who doesn't quite have that ego, but is the best player to ever live. So to have that type of experience coming into a national team like U.S. men's national team is invaluable. Of course, at Chelsea, the club was a disaster, but honestly, Pochettino did rather well. He took Chelsea from 12th position the year before into a 6th place finish, which now looks pretty good. And again, we're going to pull back to that second point of player development, because Cole Palmer was the signing of the season, arguably the player of the season in the Premier League last year, and Pochettino turned him into that within a year. Chelsea really tried to sign about 10 players before they got Cole Palmer, but eventually Palmer was the guy who came in, and Poch, within a year, turned him into a world beater. So it's a trend that Pochettino has shown throughout his career to be able to develop players, and that is going to be crucial on the national team level. And whether he was at Spurs or Chelsea, statistically his teams were usually closer to that of Manchester City or Liverpool than they were to the rest of the league. In my opinion, he was the third best manager in the Prem during that time, outdoing the likes of Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, Carlo Ancelotti. He was just one of the best in the Premier League, and he was also one of the best in all of Europe. He has the 8th most wins over the past many years of any coach in Europe. That is fantastic. It tells you just how good he is. And one of the things that, a side note of what could benefit the U.S. men's national team, is that he favors a 4-2-3-1. Yes, he can play the 4-3-3 that the U.S. men's national team has been playing. Maybe he'll do that, but he does generally favor a 4-2-3-1. I think that could benefit certain players, namely a Gio Reyna at the 10, or somebody who doesn't get as many minutes in a Johnny Cardoso who plays in a double pivot at club. These are a bunch of different players that could get more looks in, have a better system that fits them if Pochettino determines that that is the best thing for the national team. Now, I do want to recognize that there are a few potential negatives. I can spot 3. I will go in order of least impactful to most impactful because, there have to be concerns in some aspects, but really, when you look at Mauricio Pochettino, there aren't many. The first one being that he's obviously not American. He's an Argentinian coach. We know that no team has ever won the World Cup with a foreign coach at the helm, but the U.S. men's national team is not winning a World Cup, so it's not really a worry of mine. And in American coaching, we don't have the quality of Poch, all due respect to Jesse Marsch, Pellegrino Matarazzo, and Steve Cherundolo. They're just not at that level. I will recognize that Jurgen Klinsmann maybe had some issues understanding the American player, so that could be the only question mark there, but I really just don't see this as an issue at all, especially when Mauricio Pochettino speaks English and Spanish fluently, which obviously is important to speak English, but Spanish as well. There's a huge Spanish-speaking population in the U.S., especially when it comes to media coverage of soccer in this country, and having a fluent Spanish speaker to give those interviews is only helpful. The second piece is that he has never been a national team manager. And maybe, again, this can be an issue in certain aspects of the game, but to me, football is football for the most part. He understands tactically the game. Yes, it's a little bit different to have to coach a team when you're watching them on film. Most part, you don't have a ton of time with them on the training pitch, whether that's, 10 days or 2 weeks ahead of a tournament, which there won't be many, or a week ahead of friendlies. You don't get them day in, day out as you do in a club, and that is a difference that Mauricio Pochettino will have to adjust to. We'll see how much of an adjustment that is for him. I think he'll be fine, partly because of the third one, which can also be looked at as a potential negative, is that he will be based in Europe. As far as we know now, he has no plans to live in the United States. Now, that to me is a benefit because he is keeping a close eye on those European-based players, which at this point is the vast majority of our squad. So that is only beneficial. Obviously, it can be a negative because you want him involved in the U.S., whether that is media coverage or MLS or whatever else it may be, things in the United States. He is the United States men's national team head coach, and we want him to grow the game within the United States, not just go and succeed on the pitch. And part of that is to grow the fan base, teach Americans more about this game. But again, if he's keeping a closer eye on those European-based players, that can only be a benefit. And that leads me into the third point, which again is that accountability. And that's a few things. First, it's that the players are no longer friends with the manager. And I've avoided saying Greg Berhalter's name up until this point in the video, but I do think that the difference here is important to highlight because Greg Berhalter had personal relationships with a lot of these players, and that results in a different interaction with the player. It results in a different mentality on the pitch, and it results in a potentially more locked-in starting position, starting 11, starting lineup. That is not the case for Mauricio Pochettino. Their relationships are going to be simply player to coach, nothing more, nothing less. And I think that that is helpful because not only are they focused solely on what is happening on the pitch, winning those games, but there's no loyalty to past lineups. That means that if Poch decides, hey, it's time for this player to come out, this player to come in, he has the whole breadth of choices at his disposal to say, this is what I believe, this is who needs to be in my team, and if that is to bring back in a player like John Brooks because we need some more experience, that's what he does. If it's to dispose of a player like Tim Weah because whatever reason, that's what he does. It's crucial for him to not have these relationships and to now everybody has to fight for their spot. Unless you're basically Christian Pulisic, you are fighting for your position in this team now under a new manager, and that, again, is only beneficial. But it's not just the accountability that is now on the players. It's an accountability for Mauricio Pochettino. I always said this with Greg Berhalter because there wasn't a ton on the line for him. If he didn't succeed, that was not his first priority in terms of worrying about his reputation, worrying about his CV, worrying about his future in coaching. To Greg Berhalter, that the U.S. men's national team job was the biggest job in the world, and fair enough. To Mauricio Pochettino, it's not necessarily that. Obviously, it's a massive job, and he understands that by taking it, but he understands that his career goes beyond the U.S. men's national team. It goes beyond 2026, and he doesn't want to have any disaster. He doesn't want to ruin his reputation. The opposite, he wants to grow his reputation and show that he can not only do it at club level, but do it on the national team level, even without one of the top squads in the world. And of course, that will all lead to one clear goal of the World Cup in 2026, which I think, again, is beneficial. There's not a bunch of other tournaments or any other things in between that Pochettino has to worry about and focus on. He has to prepare for one tournament and one tournament only. Now, obviously, that puts pressure on that tournament, but that's something that Pochettino is used to. And I think it's important also to look at what we look at as the expectation for them. To me, the quarterfinals are an expectation because we've done that already in 2002 under Bruce Arena. I think if you got to the round of 16, as we did last World Cup, it would be another disappointment. Granted, it's an expanded World Cup, so it starts in the round of 32 rather than the round of 16. You have to win an elimination round game in order to make the round of 16, but I still don't think that people would be satisfied with a round of 16 exit. That would be a disappointment because it's the same thing. A quarterfinal would be the expectation, and a semifinal to me would be a massive success, obviously. And so it's kind of that teeter-totter of whether a quarterfinal is your expectation or whether that is a goal of yours, whether that would be overachieving. That you can tell me in the comments. I think there's a good debate to be had. For me, semifinal would be a massive success, no question. Quarterfinal, more debatable. But with all that said, Mauricio Pochettino is undoubtedly a home run hire for me. It's the best hire we were really going to get. Yes, you would love a Pep or Klopp, but Pep has a job and Klopp doesn't want one. So we have a top 5 national team coach in the world now, and you can't ask for better than that. But I would love to hear if you agree with me on that. What do you think of Mauricio Pochettino? You let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like and subscription. It really helps out the channel. I will see you next time.